Hi, I'm Elizabeth and today I'm here to do the non-fiction on Booktube tag. This was created by Olive from the channel Book Olive to coincide with non-fiction November. I want to do this while it's still November, so here I am. I don't think I've been specifically tagged in this. If I have missed it, I'm sorry. But I have been mentioned by at least 3 people that I've seen. So I saw Mark Nash was talking about some books that I had recommended to him, and I was given a shout out by Pauline at Dancing Lawn. I was also given a very lovely, heartwarming shout out by Andrea from Infinite Text. So thank you to all of you guys, and I will leave links to all of their channels down below and consider me tagged through them. So here's the questions. I have them written down. If I look down, that's why. The first question is simply, how much non-fiction do you read? And I think that depends on when you ask me. It will vary a bit from year to year. Last year it was about a third of my reading, and I think that is a good baseline. I think that is pretty much my average. And then this year has been a very non-fiction heavy year, and I've read, well, I think by the end of the year I will be at about 50-50 with fiction and non-fiction. So that's a nice balance. And also, non-fiction has been a part of my reading diet ever since childhood. I have been mixing fiction and non-fiction for almost as long as I can remember. So for now, it feels just like a natural thing to me to read both fiction and non-fiction. Then just how much I read of one or the other will just depend on my mood, I guess. Question 2 is, what kind of non-fiction videos do you make or do you want to make on Booktube? I don't think I've made a lot of specifically non-fiction related videos, even though my very first one was 5 non-fiction books about ancient history that I had read recently. I've also made one video with 5 memoirs I love, and I've made some single book reviews that has been about non-fiction books. So I think that's about my total tally as of yet. As for what I want to do, I mean, I've been meaning to, since I made this channel, to make some videos about language related books. I just have this weird perfectionism when it comes to talking about that, so the videos never see the light of day because they're never good enough. But yeah, I would like to make some language related videos sometime in the future. The question 3 is, what's your favorite subgenre of non-fiction? Well, I do like memoir and biography and personal essays. And as for topics, I am mostly drawn to history books, particularly about ancient history or Viking Age Norway or Tudor England. And the other thing is language and linguistic related books. I mean, I will read books on other topics as well, but these are my favorites. These are the ones that I'm really drawn to and where most of my reading belongs. Question 4 is, do you have a favorite non-fiction book? That's hard to answer. I have many favorite non-fiction books. I have chosen 2 from my shelves that called out to me today. So I have Just Kids by Patti Smith, which is a memoir. It was one of the books on my top 10 books of all time lists. It was number 2 on that list, I think. And yeah, I really love this book. And then I also have Empires of the Word, A Language History of the World by Nicholas Ostler, because this was the book that got me into linguistics in the first place, so it will always have a special place in my heart because of that. This is all about, language history. Question number 5 is, what do you think keeps people from wanting to read more non-fiction? And I don't think my answer to this is going to be terribly original, because I, like every other person who's done this tag, say that it has probably a lot to do with school. If school is the only place where you have ever experienced non-fiction, I have no problem in seeing why you think it would be dull. Because reading non-fiction in school is a very different experience. than reading it on your own volition. First of all, because it is a weird setting to read things in school, because you're not reading it to enjoy it, you are reading it to memorize facts so that you can be quizzed on them later. That is a very peculiar way of reading things. And then you won't have chosen what you read, someone else will have chosen it for you. It might be on a topic that doesn't really interest you that well, you just need to do it because somebody tells you to. And then finally, let's face it, textbooks are not always written to be enjoyable as much as they are written to give you those exact facts you need to be able to learn, to be able to answer the quiz or the test later on. So, I was reading a lot of history books while I was in school on my own time, and I was really enjoying that. But even I found our history books really dull, the ones we were reading in class. And more than that, I think also that if you keep telling yourself that you're not a non-fiction reader, then that will become the truth. If you want to change, and if you want to actually try to become a non-fiction reader, you should tell yourself that I'm a fiction reader that might be open to reading non-fiction occasionally. Maybe that will help. I don't know. Question 6 is, why do I like non-fiction? And I think that for me it is very much a question about curiosity. I'm always curious about things. I always want to learn new things. And I think that if I'm not challenged, if I feel like I'm not learning new things, if I don't have anything to stretch for, I grow bored very easily. So I just really have this urge in me to constantly learn new things. I think that's sort of the driving force of my life. And non-fiction helps me do that. It helps me dive into new topics and learn new things and improve the skills I already have by reading more about those as well. So for me, that's my driving force for reading non-fiction. You can also learn things from fiction, of course, but the mix of the two is always best, in my opinion. What's a non-fiction book you read because of Booktube? That's question 7. I think that for non-fiction more than for fiction, I tend to make choices on my own whim, more than hearsay or what I've seen or heard about the books. With fiction, I always go into bookshops or the library with something in mind. There are books I'm curious about that I've heard a lot about, but whereas with non-fiction, I usually go into a place and I go looking for whatever books they have on a certain topic, and I will look at them and I will choose the one that speaks to me the most at the time. So I think I do more independent choices for non-fiction than for fiction, which I enjoy. But I also have books that I have bought and read because of Booktube. I think the very first one was this, which is called Battling the Gods, Atheism in the Ancient World by Tim Whitmarsh, which I bought because I saw it on the channel of Jean from Jean's Bookish Thoughts way back when I first started watching YouTube. And then last summer, I was in Hay-on-Wye, which is a lovely book town in Wales with tons of bookshops. And on my very first day there, before going out book shopping, I was watching a video by Steve Donoghue where he mentioned Ex Libris by Anne Fadiman. So when I saw this in the bookshop, I first went into like half an hour after watching that video. I bought it, I read it the same day, and I absolutely adored it. So that was a good recommendation. Question 8 is, what's the best non-fiction book you've read lately? I think my favorite non-fiction book of the year, so far at least, has been Insomniac City, New York, Oliver Sacks and Me by Bill Hayes. This was a memoir about his moving to New York and meeting and becoming the boyfriend of Oliver Sacks, and their life together, but also just about walking through New York, taking pictures and talking to random people. And this was just beautiful and I loved every page of it. Question 9 is, what are some of your non-fiction reading goals? The fact of it is, this year none of my reading goals has been specifically non-fiction related. Apparently I don't need it, since I've been reading more non-fiction this year than any year for a long time. I have had specifically non-fiction related goals in the past. They have usually been to read at least 5 books on either a certain topic or within a certain subgenre. But yeah, this year none of my reading goals are non-fiction related. Question 10 is, what's your advice for incorporating more non-fiction into your reading diet? I've heard a lot of people recommending audiobooks as a way to get into it, especially if you already listen to podcasts, and I think that is a good advice. For me, that was my way into audiobooks, because I wasn't really capable of listening to audiobooks and concentrating on hearing this person speaking into my headphones, but I did start off by listening to podcasts, and then eventually that translated into listening to non-fiction audiobooks, and that worked super well. And now I can also listen to fiction audiobooks. So for me, non-fiction was a way of sneaking in audiobooks, but I think it could also be the other way around. Other than that, I would say my main advice is to choose books on a topic that already interests you. So if you're into sports, find books about the sport you like. If you're into butterflies, there are plenty of books about that, and you get my gist. Or if you're reading a fiction book that involves something that sounds interesting, find a non-fiction book about that to pair it up with. I know that's one of Olive's pet projects, to combine fiction and non-fiction in pairings like that. Also, I think memoir is a good genre to start with, because a lot of memoirs kind of read like fiction anyways. They are usually quite literary in form, and they tell the story of somebody's life. So that could be another way in, I guess. There is also a bonus question to this tag, and that is to recommend some other booktubers that you get non-fiction recommendations from. And I watch a lot of different booktube channels, and I get recommendations from just about all of them, but I made a short list of someone to mention specifically. So first off, we have Justin from Triumphal Reads. I was so happy when I discovered his channel, because he's talking about a lot of very interesting history books. Also the stuff that is pre-Greece and Rome. Before finding his channel, I hadn't seen anyone else talking about that, so that was great. He also talks a lot about fantasy books, which I also like, so generally I like his channel. Natalie at The Curious Reader always have lots of great non-fiction recommendations. I mean, she's part of organizing Nonfiction November this year as well, especially the Instagram part of it. Sophie from Redhead Reading always reads a lot of very interesting non-fiction books, both about history, about lots of biographies of different interesting people, a lot of LGBTQ plus stuff or feminism stuff. I mean, she reads varied, and I like to hear about both her fiction and non-fiction picks. Brian at Bookish has also a lot of interesting history books, as have Peg on the History Shelf, which is a channel I have recently discovered. So that's a new great discovery for me. Lukasz at Totally Pretentious always reads books that sound super fascinating and that I never get around to reading myself, but I really love him talking about them. And finally, I wanted to mention Sean and Bert at Past Storytime, particularly like to learn about new memoirs from their channel, but also a wide array of non-fiction books that I never knew existed before I watched it there. So yeah, that's my take on this tag. If you are mentioned and haven't done it already, consider yourself tagged, or if you want to do it, be my guest. Yeah, that was all for today. Until next time, bye bye.